get started then. So how did you guys decide to start your company, and what was like the initial process?
Okay, so Rodrigo and I, my business partner and I, were working with indigenous communities all around the Yucatan Peninsula. And while we were doing this, we learned a lot on how there's a lot of efforts to create businesses, like income to the communities. But these efforts usually don't work out because of different reasons. That in one hand. In the other hand, Rodrigo, he works with bees, with stingless bees, and we had a lot of contact with people in the communities, and we started realizing that as the demand of stingless bee honey was going up, the value chains were being built and they were not necessarily adding value. So we decided to jump in with two main purposes. One is to connect stingless bee honey producers to fair and responsible value chains, understood as like fair trade value chain as a whole, like an integral value chain. And in the other hand, to share information regarding bee conservation, because you know lately we hear a lot about like how bees are super important for the planet, and like without bees there will be no life and no food. But when you dig or get into the world of bees, you realize we really know very little or almost nothing about bees. And like we always say, how can we protect something we know nothing about, right? So this was like our motivation to start like building the company and like start working with producers and focus on stingless bees, but also with Apis mellifera producers, so the regular bee, that the European bee that people usually know. And that's how Miel, Nativa, Kaban, that's the name of the project, started.
Great. And I guess could you explain a little bit more about kind of the risks like to our world, like what will happen like with the bee population declining?
Hey, so we live in a mega diverse world, right? And we've changed a lot of how it's meant to work by like breaking this circle of life. Bees are, and other like insects that are pollinators, are a very big part of maintaining this equilibrium to our planet. When we talk about bees, as we said, we usually just talk about one species. There's more than 20,000 species of bees around the world. We need to understand that these 20,000 species are important to maintain the equilibrium of our planet. And to be able to preserve that, we need to get to know them. So I've told you this before, but more than 95% of bee species are actually solitary. So they do not live in organized societies. They do not have a queen. They do not produce honey. So this breaks big time what we usually think about bees. So first we need to understand that we don't know anything about bees. And then from that approach, when we talk about what would happen if bees go extinct, we need to think of these 20,000 species and not only about the European bee that has a great social and economical importance all around the world, right? So these 20,000 species of bees coevoluted with flowers. So every species of bee has a very intricate relationship to a certain group of plants and flowers. So if you lose one species, you're losing the pollinator to a specific groups of plants and flowers. There's even bees that depend on one flower, and the flower is dependent on that bee. So it could be that intricate. And then you have other bees that are not so selective, like the European bee, that can spread around the world easily, but that cannot pollinate every single species of flower. Okay, so that's why maintaining like or preserving all species of bees is very, very important.
Yeah, I think people don't realize that like even just like one species, like you said, going like extinct would be so drastically like horrible for the world.
Exactly, it's like the domino effect, right? So you
Yeah,
lose one species, and then that. I don't think we get how complex the world we live in is, right? So we don't get to like understand it. We just get like a hint, but we
yeah,
don't really understand how intricate and complex the relationships between everything is, right?
yes, for sure. And then are there any things that like the government of Mexico have they done anything to like protect bees specifically? Like have they passed legislation or anything similar?
Yeah. Not only in Mexico, all around the world, there's a lot of efforts towards preserving the bees. But again, we tend to fall into the same mistake. If you go on Facebook and social media, you notice all the communication it's towards Apis mellifera bee, the bee that has an economic importance because the honey industry is like $1 billion industry all around the world. So it's a big problem if we're losing population of this particular species of bee because you lose population and then you lose honey production and of course you lose money, right? So that's a big social problem, of course. But all the conservation or most of the conservation initiatives are focused on these bee. So here in Mexico, for example, you'll see some efforts on uh, promoting the population, that the population of these honeybees goes up, and they buy queen bees from other countries and import them, and they give small producers utensils and tools to work with these bees, and so they can have more hives, but it's all focused on this bee. And even like that's a good thing, but it's not an integral approach either, because we're focusing on bringing like queen bees and like giving producers tools so they can profit more, but we're not approaching the issue with reforestation, for example, right? So, like here in Yucatan, we have honey that's very popular around the world. It's called Sicilche honey. It's a monofloral honey that we get in the first trimester of the year. I'll write that for you, Sicilche. And Germans love this honey. We export a lot of Sicilche honey to Europe. And the Sicilche honey is decreasing every year, and that's a social and economic problem. But it's not gonna get solved just by having more bees if we don't have enough Sicilche. So this tree that flowers or blooms the first trimester of the year, if we're having deforestation and the urban areas are getting bigger and bigger, of course we'll have less and less Sicilche every year. So, but nobody's planting Sicilche, and it's such like an important uh, plan for the peninsula in many terms. So that's what I mean when the initiatives for bee conservation are not being integral. Um, we're focusing on just one bee, and even focusing on that one bee, we're not doing like the the whole thing. So I think a lot of these initiatives are very good intention, but they're done from the desks, not from the field, and not from a true understanding of the environment, of the ecosystem, the natural, the social, the economic. Like we need to, I think we need to build solutions that come from diverse groups. So we need the expert in bees, but then we need also the expert in sales and the expert in reforestation and the expert in urbanization, because if not, we will not solve complex problems require complex solutions. And you won't get to that with just like a team, a small team that works from the desk. You know.
Yeah. It's like you said, all like the relationship is so intricate and they're so individual that by only protecting one, you can't kind of protect the other species, and you're just kind of letting them fall off.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
we now with stingless bees are getting more and more popular. These are native bees we have in the Yucatan. The Mayas used to work with these bees, and in Mexico we have 46 species of stingless bees, and in the Yucatan we have 17 species. And from those 17, there's one called Melipona beche that produces a very unique honey that has medicinal properties that people use to cure cataracts, glaucoma, to strengthen the immune system. So it has a lot of these medicinal properties. And even though the mice used to work with these bees, they stopped when the other bee was introduced. And in the past 5 to 10 years, it's becoming popular again. So now there's a lot of focus in Melipona beche, and there's some initiatives to try to like preserve and promote the work with this bee. But again, it's one species out of 17 stingless bees we have in the Yucatan. So we're having the same approach, just
Yeah.
one species and not like an integral solution.
Yeah, no, totally. That makes sense. And then I guess, what are some things that you guys do to kind of educate your clients and customers on how they can actually protect bees?
Well, we believe that without information, there cannot be actions for preservation. So one of the main pillars from our company, Miel, Nativa, Kaban, is to learn. We cannot protect something we know nothing about. We need to learn to create value chains. We need to learn to promote fair trade. So learning is a very important part of our project. We try to create spaces for learning, not only with our clients, but with the producers we work with and all along the value chain, right? So with our clients specifically, we have a spot in Merida where we sell our products, and we designed this spot so we have a lot of visual elements that will educate. So we have this muestray, you say,
Yeah,
all these,
yeah,
yeah, of bees from the peninsula, and you get to see like huge bees that are like 3 centimeters, and the green bee and the tiny bee, and we have a live hive here, so people can deconstruct what they think they know about bees and start building from solid bases and understand there's a mega diverse world out there, and that includes a mega diverse group of bees. So that's one way. We also work a lot with tourism, and we create tourism experiences like honey tastings, or we take people to see the meliponari, so the stingless beehives, so they can get in touch with the bees and taste different types of honey. And that's like a fun way to learn and to approach to conservation um, from another, because if I say come I'll talk to you about bees for 2 hours, I probably don't have a lot of people coming in. But when you approach the people in a fun way, and people love learning and getting surprised, and when you add emotion, flavors, smell, all the senses, and you create those spaces of reflection when people actually get to make reflections about their way of consuming or our way of consuming and relating to our environment, we believe that's where the true changes come, not just from telling everybody you need to save the bees. That's not a very good strategy.
yeah. No, for sure. I remember when I have never learned so much about like a specific topic in such a short amount of time. But when I visited the hives, I was like, I know so much about bees now. Like this is crazy. Like it was so interesting, and I like didn't even realize how much I was learning because I was so interested in everything, kind of like just being surrounded by it.
I know it was the same for me. Like I'm not a bee expert. Rodrigo is, but I'm not. And people are like, "Are you like a expert in bees?" I'm like, "No, I'm just like amateur." But it's fascinating, and if you learn in a fun, engaging way, then you'll be excited and you'll want to share it like I did, right? And like
Yes.
you're doing.
And then I guess what can people do kind of to protect bees? Obviously, there's a variety of things, but like, what do you guys like kind of like try and like tell people like if one thing that they can do?
The one thing that you can do that has a huge impact, it's planting native plants from the place you live in. So in social media, again, we see a lot of posts with like plant lavender or rosemary, use 3 or 4 plants to help bees, but this is not like the way our planet works. So if you want to help save the bees, do a little research, find out what plants are native from the region you live in, and plant those plants. And that's a great way of helping bees, but also other insects that are vital for pollinators. And then you'll have a garden or a backyard or the porch or the balcony full of like great insects that you can watch for hours.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I'm gonna kind of transition just a little bit to asking a little bit more about your specifics like within the company. But can you describe a little bit more about like fair trade and kind of how you guys develop that and like how it influences your business?
Okay. So as I said, we were working with indigenous groups in like many areas like tourism, handcrafts, and it's very complex to talk about fair trade. Most people usually think of fair trade like fair payment, right? But it's not that basic. It's more complex. Um, just talking about fair pay doesn't mean like I didn't bargain, so it's fair. If, for example, in our case, the producer doesn't have the same information as the intermediaries to negotiate in terms of equality, we can't talk about fair trade. So the producer needs to understand and know the same thing the intermediary knows about how the market is behaving. For example, to talk about a fair trade practice. That's just like one piece, right? And when we talk about fair trade, we also need to understand that fair trade needs to be sustainable environmentally, but also in time. So it has to be profitable because it's a business, right? And people need to earn a living. But it also has to be sustainable so we don't finish the resources. As a consumer, we need to know what had to happen for the product to get to us. In our case, as a company, we make sure the honey we buy, it's produced by the producers that we buy from. And it's not, for example, honey extracted from wild hives, which is a thing that happens, and that brings deforestation and the loss of hives. So when we talk about fair trade, it's a very complex thing altogether. The World Fair Trade Organization has a set of guidelines that help businesses turn into fair trade. We are not certificated by the World Trade Organization because those certifications are expensive. So for small business, it's hard to get a certification, but you can read the guidelines and decide in which ones can you jump to, or which ones maybe you can't do now, but you want to get there and start like creating your business from a fair trade perspective since the beginning.
Oh yeah, yeah, yes, for sure. And then going off that, um, you talked about the producers a little bit. Kind of what are the relationships you guys have with the producers and how like it impacts your business?
So we choose to work with small producers, so individuals that have between 10 and 100 hives, which is small. production, and we try to have a very close relationship with them in terms of like a horizontal relationship. So we share information from the market, from what we're learning about what's happening in the industry, and we want them to share information with us as well. So a very horizontal way of relating with our producers for us is very important. Also, a very transparent and honest relationship. So with the producers we work with, we want to know how many hives they have, because we want to know what's their production potential in a year. So if they're like selling more, like where's this honey coming from? We try to visit them and like are in touch with them regularly. Those are like our main producers, but we also work with new producers. In that sense, we people that want to learn about stingless bee, the stingless bee production, we lend them hives so they can start learning, and they agree with us that they will compromise and learn. We will teach them. They will have the hives for a year, and after a year they can duplicate. Like if we give them 5 hives, from 5 they can make 10, and then they will keep 5 more hives, and then we'll take ours and give them to a new producer, because buying a hive is very expensive for a new producer, and that way we avoid them going to the jungle and like cutting the trees, because that's another issue from the demand going up and the production not being up yet. And with those producers, they can, if they want, sell to us, but they're not obligated to. Well, not non-producer is obligated to like sell to us. It's a offer demand. If they find someone that will pay more, we're happy that they sell it to someone else, because that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming that the producers are getting what they deserve from their work, and avoiding what happens sadly in Mexico and in other countries as well, that usually the producers get paid the less in the value chains. The producer always gets the smaller part, and for me, they're one of the most important parts of the value chain, right? Not only for honey, but for everything we consume, like our food.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, most for almost everything in our lives. Yeah. And then could you talk a little bit about, I guess, the cultural importance of bees to like Mexican culture? I know, like in the Mayan culture, bees are very important.
Yes, so we didn't have the European bee here in Mexico. That species was introduced by the English in the 16th century. So here in America, the continent, we had native bees, stingless bees. The Mayas were the first to start working with stingless bees many thousands of years ago. We have a Mayan code, one of the few remaining. It's called the Madrid Code, or Trocortesiano Code. And this code, it's a very interesting one, because it talks about the Mayas' sacred relationship to food. So they talk about deer hunting and corn, but a big part of this code talks about their relationship, their sacred relationship to bees, to stingless bees, which were the bees they had here. And also we have archaeological sites that were built in honor of the Mayan god of the bees that goes for different names. Amusen Gab is one of those. Gab means bee in Maya. So Amusen Gab is the guardian of the bees. And for the Mayas, there were 4 gods that hold the universe in place. One of those gods, it's a bee god, the descendant god. So this just like tells you about like the huge cultural importance bees had for the Mayas. And if you go to a Mayan community and you talk to the elder, they have Mayan names for every single species of bee we have here. We have like bees or abejas in Spanish, and then we have the scientific name, but they have like Shunanka, Ehol, Kansak, Hemembo, like every single species has its name. So that's also like a very big sign of how the close the relationship was between bees and the Mayas, and it still is. There's a lot of uses to stingless bee honey in the peninsula. People still use it in the communities to treat asthma, cataracts, glaucoma, retin detachment, dermatitis, for pregnant women, for burns, for anemia, like so many uses. And of course, if that knowledge is still alive, the relationship to the bees and the culture around it, it's still alive. It's getting, it's evolving, I would say, and some things sadly get lost, but they also adapt to the demands of the ever-changing world. But it's
Yeah.
fascinating. It's fascinating to understand their
Yeah.
perspective of bees, and not only bees, like nature. It's not easy because when you start learning like a little bit of Maya, you start understanding how their relationship to the world and the universe in general, it's completely different from ours, and you see that reflected on their language. It's, and on the relationship with the environment and with the bees and the honey.
Yeah, no, I had never heard like about that any of that history with like the code. That's super cool, and I think it just shows like the import because I mean bees have been on the earth a lot longer than we have, and I think it shows just their importance.
Yes.
And then, sorry. Lastly, I guess what are your guys' like future plans for your company? Kind of what do you guys hope to do in the next couple months, even year?
Um, well, we've talked about this. In February, we're gonna turn 3 years. We had a rough start with the pandemic, like many other. Um, for now, we want to consolidate what we're doing. So we want to consolidate our sales, but also what we're doing and how we're working with producers, old producers and new producers, and how we relate to our customers. So we want to consolidate all that, and then maybe think about expansion in another way. We would love to. We're working on exporting the honey because we know that could generate better incomes for the producers. But there is a lot of work that has to be done in legislation, and that will take a little time. But we're working on it. Not only us. There's a group of people in the peninsula in Mexico that are working towards the legal aspects of putting Melipona honey on the map.
Yeah, no, that's great. It sounds very, very exciting. Well, yeah, that is all the questions I have. Thank you so much.